He didn't yell. He just grabbed my wrist and whispered, "You're a risk." Then he smiled at the guests like I wasn't even there. They toasted to legacy, while I waited outside like a mistake. That moment didn't just break me. It reshaped who I became. Have you ever been erased from your own story if you've ever swallowed your pain in silence like I did subscribe to this channel? Because some stories can only be understood by those who've survived them. It didn't start with the betrayal, not with the investor dinner, not even the moment they left me in the car. It started long before that in the way they looked at me whenever I spoke, in the smiles that never came with real listening. That night, they left me in the car like a burden, but the truth is, I was never their burden. I was their blind spot. And blind spots only grow when you keep pretending they're not there. This is how it all began. They told me to wait in the car. It wasn't a request, it was an order masked in softness, like always. "Alara, please, this dinner is important. We can't afford any disruptions." Disruption, of course, meant me. I sat back in the leather seat of my father's Maybach, cold and rigid, like the silence I'd grown up in. Outside, the entrance to Varelli's shimmered with wealth, the curated, polished kind of glamour my family worshipped. My mother adjusted her pearl necklace as she stepped out. Cassian, my brother, was already holding the door for our younger sister, Lise, like he always did when there were eyes watching. No one looked back at me. I watched them disappear into the light, into the place that had no space for me. I didn't reach for the door. I didn't cry. I'd done that once years ago and learned how little it meant. Instead, I stared through the tinted window at the place I used to believe was home. I pulled out my phone. 3 messages vibrating in silence. "Lee, seriously, you couldn't just behave for once, Cassian. You're embarrassing all of us. Mom, you've always been so difficult." I locked the screen without responding. They thought I was still the girl who begged for approval, who clung to the edge of their conversations, trying to be heard. The girl who brought her first investment idea to the family dinner table when she was 16 and was met with condescending smiles and a patronizing pat on the head. "That's cute, darling," Father had said, "but let's leave business to the grown-ups." I was never invited to that table again, so I built my own. They thought I left out of rebellion. They never understood I left to survive. At 19, I took my share of the trust, much smaller than what Cassian received, of course, and vanished from the headlines of the Wynn family's PR machine. They let me go, convinced I'd return when I failed. "It's a phase," Mother said. "She'll come back when reality hits." But I didn't. Reality didn't hit me. I hit back first. While they clung to prestige and legacy, I watched the world change. I saw startups rewrite the rules. I saw AI learn faster than analysts and code outperform old money. So I bet on the future, one venture at a time, quietly, strategically, until AM Vestor Capital, a faceless holding firm, began to own the very companies Win and Win needed to stay afloat, including Varelli Tech, the very firm they were begging for a partnership with tonight. They didn't know the CEO had already signed with someone else, me. They didn't know the girl they'd hidden in the back seat was now the one pulling the strings. The restaurant's doorman glanced at the car. I didn't move. Not yet. Let them enjoy their illusions for a little longer. Let them believe the night belonged to them. I looked at the folder beside me, signed contracts, binding and final. With one phone call, I could end the game. But where's the justice in that? Where's the story? No. I'd let them pitch their dreams. I'd let Father do his monologue. Cassian would present numbers he didn't understand. Liz would charm with her perfect smile. Then I'd walk in. I smoothed the front of my navy silk dress. Subtle. Strategic. Every thread a choice. They called me emotional. I called it vision. They called me unstable. I called it unafraid. They called me a failure. Today they call me boss. And when I open that door, they'll realize the seat they made me wait in was always the one with the real power. They didn't know I was already in the building. I didn't take the main entrance. I walked through the rear corridor of Varelli's, the one usually reserved for owners, investors, and ghosts who haunt boardrooms. A staff member recognized me. "Miss Wynn," he said softly, almost uncertain. "Just Alara," I replied. "Room 7, please." He didn't ask questions. He didn't need to. In the world I built, silence served me better than titles ever did. Room 7 was adjacent to the private dining room where my family was already laying out their carefully polished bait for the investors. I could hear the clinking of crystal, the soft hum of practiced voices' laughter that never quite reached the eyes. They didn't know their prey had already chosen another. I stood outside the door for a few seconds longer than I should have, not out of hesitation, out of respect for the girl I used to be, the one who once begged to be included. Inside, my father was speaking. The Wynn legacy has always been built on integrity and insight, he said. 3 generations of precision and prudence. We don't chase trends. We lead quietly. He was selling the illusion, the same one I was forced to swallow for years. I opened the door. The light from the hallway spilled in, slicing through their rehearsed performance like a blade. Heads turned, glasses stilled, voices dropped. It was Cassian who reacted first. His mouth hung open for a second before snapping shut. Alara. His voice cracked with disbelief. What are you doing here? My father's expression froze, a perfect sculpture of control unraveling. Alara, he said again, this time slower. This is a private meeting. I know I answered, stepping in, but I believe one of the companies being discussed belongs to me. Silence. Then from the far end of the table, one of the older men, Leonard Kane, co-founder of Virelli Tech, stood up with a warm smile. There she is, he said, stepping around the table to shake my hand. Wasn't sure you'd show in person. I smiled politely. I wouldn't miss this. My family stared in slow horror. I'm sorry, my mother began, her voice low, dangerous. Mr. Kane, what is the meaning of this? Leonard turned to her with effortless ease. You didn't know your daughter is the principal investor in AM Vestra Capital. Cassian rose from his seat abruptly. No, that's impossible. AM Vestra is owned entirely by Alara Wynn. Leonard finished. She's been our largest supporter. She holds controlling shares in Virelli Tech. This dinner was her idea. I placed the folder gently on the table in front of my father. The words, Virelli Tech acquisition. Final signatures gleamed in silver foil. Father didn't move. His hands rested on either side of the folder, still as granite. You set this up, he whispered. I nodded. You always taught me timing is everything. I suppose I learned that well. You manipulated us, my mother hissed. You humiliated us in front of investors. No, I said calmly. I revealed the truth. You brought the mask. I just removed it. Cassian looked between me and the documents like his world had turned upside down. You don't have the capital. You never did the math I cut in. I've been outperforming Wynn & Wynn's growth rate by 320% for 3 consecutive years. But you wouldn't know that, because you never looked past my absence. My father finally opened the folder. His eyes scanned the contracts with the speed of a man who's spent his life negotiating, but this time there was no leverage, no loophole. You bought the very company we came here to acquire, he said slowly. I didn't buy it, I corrected. I built the opportunity and earned their trust. There's a difference. Lee stood up too, her voice trembling. Why? Why would you do this to us? I turned to her gentler than I expected. Because you never asked me who I became. You only remembered who I used to be. Cassian's voice was bitter now. This is revenge. No, I whispered. This is clarity. A beat of silence. And then Leonard spoke again awkwardly. Shall we reschedule? I looked at him. No need. You're already signed with AM Vestra. You're already mine. I turned back to my family, the weight of years pressing in, but I stood taller beneath it. You told me I was too emotional, too dramatic, too impulsive, I said. But emotions didn't build my empire. Vision did. Silence did. Patience did. I stepped away from the table toward the door. And now, I want you to see what it feels like to be the ones left behind. As I reached for the door handle, my father finally spoke, voice low, gravel worn. Alara, you think you've won, but you don't know the whole story. I stopped. For the first time in years, I was afraid. I left before he could say more, not out of cowardice, but because I knew what was coming. My father never made idle threats. His words were always blades, sheathed in silence, sharp only when drawn. I'd learned painfully that his quietest moments held the most danger. I didn't want to hear it. Not yet. I needed air, space, time to breathe again. Varelli's rooftop lounge was mostly empty, the night air crisp against my skin. From up here, the city looked like it belonged to someone else, clean, pulsing with light, full of people who didn't know the weight of a family name. A world I had once run into, not because I had somewhere to go, but because I needed to get away. I sat alone, fingers tracing the rim of my glass. I hadn't taken a sip. The tension still sat in my chest like a held breath. My phone buzzed again, this time a message from Lise. "You planned this, all of it, even back then, didn't you?" I didn't reply. Because the truth was, yes, I did. Not out of spite, out of necessity. I remember the exact moment I realized I had to leave them behind. It was 6 years ago. I was 18. My father had invited the firm's board to a family celebration, which was really just another opportunity to parade Cassian as his perfect heir. The house was filled with cold marble and colder people. Everyone smiled with their teeth, but not their eyes. I had spent weeks building a predictive analytics model. It used real-time data scraped from social platforms to anticipate market shifts before they happened. I showed it to Father in private. He looked at it for less than a minute before handing it back. "Alara," he said, "these numbers are clever, but they aren't real. Sentiment doesn't drive markets. Logic does." I tried to explain. He interrupted. "We're not gamblers," he said. "We invest, with discipline." Then he asked me to fetch drinks for the guests. That night, I stood alone in the hallway watching him raise a toast to Cassian. Everyone clapped. I just stood there, invisible, holding a silver tray with empty glasses. They didn't lose me. They never really had me. I lost the illusion of family that night. I didn't leave with drama. No slamming doors, no yelling. Just a small suitcase, a half-written algorithm on a flash drive, and a single train ticket out of the city. I remember standing on the platform alone, watching the skyline disappear into fog. No one texted, no one called. They just let me vanish, like I'd never mattered. For a while, I lived in a cheap apartment where the shower barely worked and the walls whispered other people's arguments. I ate instant noodles and coded through the night. Some days I couldn't feel my fingers, but I felt alive. I found people who believed in ideas, not bloodlines. I pitched. I failed. I pitched again. I met a man named Felix who believed in the same future I did. We co-founded a startup that failed spectacularly, but the failure taught us more than any of my father's lectures ever had. I worked in silence, let my work speak louder than my name. Amvestra didn't appear overnight. It was born from rejection, from hunger, from necessity. And now, it stood tall enough that Dorian Wynn had to look up to see me. I took a breath, staring out over the city. Somewhere below, my family was licking their wounds, scrambling to understand how they'd miscalculated so badly. But it wasn't miscalculation. It was arrogance. They never thought I would walk away for good, and they never imagined I'd be the one holding the power they were chasing. I stood up, feeling the wind tug gently at the hem of my coat. Maybe I had gone too far. Maybe I hadn't gone far enough. Because deep down I knew one thing: Father hadn't finished speaking. And whatever story he thought I didn't know, it was coming for me. When I got back to the office, the city had folded into itself. Streets' emptied windows glowed like embers in the dark. Up here, 60 stories above, the noise, the world felt quiet again. I unlocked the glass doors to AM Vestra's headquarters, the motion sensors waking the room into a soft, cold hum. Holograms lit up slowly, data projections, investment curves, neural learning algorithms spinning like constellations. Every inch of this space was designed for precision, not comfort. There were no soft chairs, no nostalgic paintings, just vision, just movement, just war. But tonight it felt like a church. And I was the only one left inside it. I walked slowly across the polished floor to my desk, clean, sterile, and waiting. A single tablet was lit with the glowing final contract for the Varelli acquisition. All it needed was my signature. I didn't touch it. I sat. And for a long while, I just breathed. There was no one left to impress now. No one watching, no audience. Only me. Only that quiet voice inside that still asked, and then what, Alara? The voice of doubt. The voice I'd taught myself to silence years ago, but lately it had started whispering again. I remember sitting in a cramped room at 21 reading rejection emails on a cracked laptop, my phone shut off to save battery. I remember circling dates on a calendar with no money to make it to them. I remember pulling my coat tighter on nights I couldn't afford the heat, and still I'd kept building. Because even when the world screamed no, I told myself not yet doesn't mean never. That voice carried me here, but now that I'd arrived, it didn't feel like I thought it would. I stood and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window. My reflection stared back, sleek, composed, perfectly dressed. But behind the polish, I saw her again. The girl who used to press her ear against the dining room door, hoping to hear her name spoken with pride instead of pity. I touched the glass palm flat. I didn't do this to win, I whispered. I did this so I wouldn't disappear. Behind me, the tablet chimed, a reminder midnight signing. I turned, sat, and picked up the stylus. Then my phone lit up. Felix. You sure you're ready for this? I stared at the screen. I'd worked for years to stand here. Fought tooth and claw through shadows, taught myself markets and models and strategy while my family toasted themselves at banquets. I'd built empires while eating dollar ramen and reading market reports by candlelight. But tonight didn't feel like a crown. It felt like a reckoning. I didn't reply. Instead, I opened the bottom drawer of my desk. Inside, untouched for years, were 3 old notebooks, cracked, leather-worn pages, filled with scribbles, arrows, equations, dreams. My first ideas. My first version of A.M. Vestra before the world knew it by name. I curled up on the sofa by the corner lamp, cradling those notebooks like letters from a younger version of myself. My heels were off-coat, draped on the floor, hair undone. That night, I didn't sign the contract. That night, I walked alone. No plans, no expectations, but for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid. The sun hadn't fully risen when I stepped out into the street. The air was quiet, not the kind of silence that demands attention, but the kind that sits next to you quietly like an old friend who doesn't ask questions. I pulled my coat tighter, put in my earbuds, and walked. No one knew who I was at this hour. I wasn't Alara Wynn, not CEO, not disappointment. Just someone blending into the early light, carrying too much weight in her spine and not enough sleep in her eyes. I stopped at a small cafe 2 blocks from Vestra's headquarters. The barista didn't recognize me. I was thankful for that. She handed me a coffee with my name scribbled wrong on the cup. I smiled. Somehow that made me feel more real. I sat by the window, watching traffic slowly come to life. The world moved on, unaware of the storm that had broken loose inside me. Felix showed up 15 minutes later. Same dark coat, same worn sneakers. He'd never cared about dressing the part. It's what made him brilliant and dangerous. You didn't sign, he said as he slid into the chair across from me. I shook my head, not yet. He studied me for a moment, then reached into his satchel. He pulled out a manila envelope and slid it across the table. It was thick, heavy. My name wasn't on it, but my family's was. Wynn Group, internal discrepancies, scrawled across the top. What is this? I asked, my voice barely above a breath. Something I found while running a background scan before the acquisition, he said. I wasn't going to show you, but after last night, I think you deserve to know. I stared at the envelope like it might burn me. Then I picked it up. Inside were pages. Dozens of them, reports, audit trails, old investment logs, names I recognized and dates I couldn't forget. One sheet made my blood run cold. 2017 Internal Adjustment of Trust Allocations. Subject Alara Wynn. Initiator D. Wynn. I read the line 3 times. My father had manipulated the trust documents, reduced my share, quietly, without informing me, redirected it to Cassian and Lice. And it wasn't just me. Other discrepancies followed. Staff pensions funneled into private offshore accounts, executive bonuses signed off in silence, whole portfolios reshaped behind board members' backs. And then I saw it. A name, hidden in one of the old wire transfers. F. Ainsley. Felix's full name, My eyes snapped up. "You're in the system." I was, he said, calm, not defensive. "Back then." He nodded. "You worked with them. I worked under them, on the tech team, until I saw what they were doing. And you never told me. I needed you to trust me. You had enough reasons to push everyone away." The pause between us was long. It wasn't anger I felt, not yet. It was something slower, denser. The kind of emotion that settles in your lungs and makes it harder to breathe. "You were the one who told me to leave," I said quietly. "Back in that apartment. You said, they don't deserve you." "I meant it," he replied. "But you were one of them." "I was. Until I saw what they did to you." I leaned back, fingers tightening around the cup until the heat became pain. That day in 2017, I thought I left because I was weak. But now I knew they'd already chosen to cut me out. I wasn't rebellious, I was erased. I looked at the pages again, the quiet betrayal inked in numbers and approvals and signatures. My entire story, rewritten without my consent. I stood up slowly, the envelope held tight in my hand. The world outside blurred as I stepped into the street. People passed by, cars honked, life moved on, but I couldn't move, not yet, because everything I believed about my fall had just shattered. And now I had to decide what kind of storm I wanted to become. I didn't cry, not after reading the documents, not after learning how deliberate it all was. It was strange how calm I felt, because once the betrayal settled in, something else took its place. Focus. I spent the rest of the morning in silence, poring over every page Felix had given me. Every hidden transfer, every falsified report, every signature that reeked of cover-up. My family hadn't just pushed me out. They'd constructed an entire system that thrived off my absence. It wasn't personal. It was structural. They had removed me the way you might remove a faulty wire, not because it sparks, but because it interrupts the current. But what they didn't account for was that I learned to build my own circuit. By 9 a.m., I was in the war room at AM Vestra. I'd never used the term before, but today it felt right. 3 walls of interactive screens, one filled with every public holding tied to Win and Win, another showing layered shell companies I'd quietly acquired over 5 years, and the third, my strike board. I moved digital nodes with my fingertips, dragging lines across subsidiaries, shadow trusts, and vulnerable partnerships. Felix stood next to me silent until I turned. "We hit phase 2 today," I said. He nodded. "You're sure?" I stared at the screen. They erased me like I was nothing. Now I'll show them how dangerous nothing can become. We didn't start with announcements, no press, no drama, just movement. We began isolating key assets, real estate, legal partners, dormant shell cores that had once belonged to Win and Win, but were now entangled with our private funds. Quiet divestments, shifts in offshore accounts, enough to destabilize them without ever drawing a headline. Next came leverage. I met with Evelyn Cho, one of the best legal tacticians in the city. Over coffee and shadows, I slid her a thin folder marked whistleblower coverage. Her eyes lit up as she flipped through it. "This is solid," she said. "If what's in here goes public..." "It won't," I replied, "not unless I need it to." I wasn't out for destruction. I was out for precision. Let the empire wobble first. Let them sense the shift, but not see the blade. At night, I stood in my office with the city burning gold below me. Everything moved quietly beneath the surface, but I knew the ground had already cracked. And then a message. From internal AM channel, subject confirmed Cassian Wynn's personal shell entity. Crosslinks to illicit transfer, May 2018. I read it twice, then smiled. Perfect. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about setting the balance right, not by yelling, but by shifting the entire floor they stood on. That night, I signed the directive labeled Operational Strike, Silent Phase. It wasn't a war. It was an extraction of everything they stole, of everything they thought they buried. And I would do it without them even realizing until it was already too late. It was a quiet betrayal I had prepared for. Cold moves on digital boards, asset isolation, legal landmines, waiting for someone to step in the wrong place. Everything I'd done up to that point was precise, controlled, strategic. I knew how they worked. I knew how to hurt them without showing my hand. But what I wasn't prepared for, what slipped past my defenses, was the letter. It arrived on a Thursday afternoon. An envelope. Sealed. No return address. Handwritten, not typed. The receptionist had placed it on my desk like any other piece of mail, except when I touched it, something in me hesitated. My name was scrawled in a script I hadn't seen in years. Alara. No title, no formal greeting, just my name. From her. My mother. I didn't open it right away. I sat with it for hours, letting the paper burn in my pocket as I moved through meetings, reviewed contracts, nodded at charts and projections. But all I could feel was that envelope small, warm, alive somehow, like it had a pulse. When I finally opened it, I was alone in my apartment. Lights off, only a small lamp in the corner casting amber shadows across the room. I slipped my finger under the flap and unfolded the letter. Her handwriting was exactly as I remembered it, graceful, slanted, a little too careful, as if she always knew someone might read over her shoulder. Alara, if you're reading this, it means I'm no longer there to explain the things I should have said long ago. I didn't breathe. She told me things I had never known, that she had fought quietly for me, that the day my father slashed my trust, she had threatened to leave, that it wasn't his decision alone, it was the board, and they'd outvoted her. That she had tried to send me money through third-party accounts, but it kept getting blocked. That she had tried to reach me through Felix. That she had known. I watched you walk away and hated myself for not stopping you, but I also knew maybe the best thing I could do was let you become someone they could never touch again. The letter was soft in places, smudged, water-stained, tears. Hers or mine, I couldn't tell. There was more. An attached document, a notarized trust amendment dated 2019. My name, my mother's signature. It restored my full inheritance. She had drafted it, funded it, and moved it to a private account under a different name. Felix had known. It had been there the whole time. My chest tightened in a way it hadn't in years. Not from betrayal, from grief. Grief for the version of her I had erased too easily, for the way I'd painted her as complicit when maybe she had sacrificed in silence. That night, I walked without a destination. The wind was sharp, not cruel. It reminded me I was still real, still here. I passed strangers laughing under cafe lights, couples fighting in parked cars, a world that kept turning unaware of the letter burning through my coat pocket. And as I turned onto the avenue, Felix was there, standing beneath a street lamp like he'd been waiting all night. I didn't know when to tell you, he said before I could speak. I didn't answer. I just handed him the letter. He read it silently, mouth tightening, and then gently he folded it back and gave it to me. She never stopped watching, he said softly. She just wasn't allowed to be seen. I sat on the bench nearby, he sat beside me, and for the first time since I was a child, I cried without shame. Because all this time I thought I had lost my mother, but maybe what I really lost was the chance to know how much she was willing to risk for me. There are moments in a war where nothing moves, no sides advance, no ground is gained, no shots are fired. There's only the stillness, the kind that makes the silence feel heavier than any explosion. I lived in that stillness for 2 days. After the letter, after the weight of knowing that everything I believed about my mother had been wrong or incomplete, I stopped everything. No meetings, no directives, no updates to the board, just air breath and time. It wasn't weakness. It was something quieter, something that felt like grief, but not just for her, for me too. For the girl I had turned my back on to become this version of myself. For the years I spent armoring up instead of healing. For the innocence I didn't know I still mourned. I didn't go back to my office. I didn't check the numbers. The empire could run without me for 48 hours. It had to. Instead, I went back to the house. Not inside, just near it. The Wynn estate looked exactly the same, symmetrical hedges, tall iron gates, windows that never welcomed light. I stood across the street hood, pulled up, watching it like an outsider, like someone visiting a museum of her own past. I didn't belong there anymore. I wasn't sure I ever had. And yet I couldn't leave. The next morning, Felix made coffee and said nothing. He didn't ask questions. Didn't press, just slid a mug across the table and returned to reading. That's what I needed. Not comfort, not advice, just presence. That night, I found my old journal buried in a box I hadn't touched since I left. The handwriting was messier, my voice more naive. But there it was, Alara at 15, dreaming of creating a fund that would help people who'd been overlooked young minds like hers, that didn't speak loud enough to be heard. One day I'll build something that doesn't need to beg for approval. I closed the journal slowly. She had believed in something bigger than revenge. She had wanted freedom, and I had turned that dream into a blade. That night, I didn't plan, didn't calculate. I just sat beneath the sky on Felix's rooftop and watched the sun vanish behind buildings I once thought unreachable. The wind was softer than usual. It didn't bite. It just moved. For the first time, I wondered, if success means nothing when it's built on loneliness, then what exactly had I been chasing? I walked back downstairs in silence, took the elevator alone, the soft hum of descent, my reflection in the mirrored walls. Who was I becoming? And was she any better than the people I once swore to rise above? The silence didn't answer. But for once, I didn't need it to. I returned without announcement. No grand entrance, no press conference, no echo of heels on marble floors. I simply walked into AM Vestra at 6:45 a.m., took the elevator to the top floor and resumed my seat behind the glass desk. The silence greeted me like an old friend, familiar, steady, ready. The letter from my mother remained locked in the top drawer. I hadn't read it again. I didn't need to. Some truths didn't change with repetition. They just settled in your bones like memory. I looked out across the city as the sun broke through clouded fog streaking the skyline in gold. Somewhere beneath that light, my father was waking to a very different world. Win and Win Holdings had begun to crack. Not from scandal, not from press, but from slow surgical dismantling. Shell companies had gone dormant. Partners were pulling out of key deals. Legal inquiries had started surfacing in departments they thought they owned. And an anonymous someone, had filed a petition for regulatory review of their offshore structures. The walls weren't caving in. They were rotting from within. And no one knew where the decay had begun. I did. And I wasn't finished yet. Felix entered without knocking. He set a folder down on the desk. "They're calling an emergency meeting," he said. Cassian's panicking. Liz hasn't spoken publicly, but he hesitated. She's been asking questions, hard ones. I didn't speak. I flipped open the folder. Projected losses, shareholder withdrawals, executive tension. It was unraveling. "What about him?" I asked. Felix knew I meant my father. He hasn't said a word, but the security logs show he's been in his office every night past midnight. That sounded like him, still pretending he could hold the line, still believing silence meant strength. I stood up, walked to the window again. I didn't feel victorious. Not yet. There was something sobering in watching an empire fall, especially when it carried your name. "I need you to draft a statement," I said. Felix blinked. "A press release." "No, a submission. To the Oversight Board, Regulatory Commission, Tax Office. Anyone who should have looked at them years ago and didn't." He studied me carefully. "You're doing this officially." I nodded. Let them defend themselves with the rules they thought they wrote. For years, they operated in the gray. Now I was turning on the light. Later that afternoon, I entered a quiet government building. No cameras, no guards, just polished linoleum and flickering lights. I carried the folder under my arm like any other citizen. The woman at the window didn't recognize my name. I was just another applicant submitting a complaint. "Thank you, Ms. Wynne," she said without irony. I nodded. "You're welcome." I left without looking back. That evening, from the 57th floor, I watched the sky shift from gold to deep violet. The last phase was in motion. Now slow, steady collapse, driven not by vengeance, but by truth, finally stepping into the light. They thought I'd disappeared, but I had simply waited until I could return, without raising my voice, without needing to ask, without needing to prove anything. And now, they would learn silence doesn't mean defeat. Sometimes, it's strategy. Hoi, ChatGPT. I didn't come to destroy them. That was never the point. But I did come for the truth and the space it needed to breathe. It was the first time I had stepped foot into the Win and Win boardroom in nearly a decade. The same marble table, the same cold air conditioning, the same smell of polished wood and power games. Nothing had changed, except me. Cassian sat stiffly, avoiding my gaze. Liz offered the smallest nod, not of approval, not of apology. Just acknowledgement. That was enough. And then there was him. My father sat at the head of the table, hands folded. No wine, no smile, no armor. He looked tired, not weak, just done. I walked to the end opposite him and placed a document gently on the table. Acquisition proposal. Win and Win Legal Holdings, presented by AM Vestra Capital. For a moment, no one moved. Then one by one, they leaned forward. It wasn't a hostile takeover. I'd crafted it carefully. No public scandal, no media frenzy, just a clean, thorough, strategic offer. I would buy the firm, preserve the legacy, modernize it, merge it under Vestra's innovation wing. All employees would be retained, including family, but no one would be above the rules. They read in silence. When the last page turned, I looked to my father. You always said I didn't understand business, I said, but I listened. Every dinner, every lesson, even when you never asked me to speak. He didn't interrupt, that was new. You taught me something I'll never forget, I continued, that the most powerful person in the room isn't always the one talking. Sometimes it's the one watching. He sat back in his chair. The light from the window fell across his face, outlining every line age had drawn. He looked at the paper, then at me, and slowly he nodded. A pen slid across the table. You win, he said, voice lower than I'd ever heard it. But I didn't feel like I had won. I didn't feel like a queen or a conqueror or the girl they used to leave in the hallway. I felt still, present, whole. I picked up the pen and signed. No cheers, no applause, just silence, the kind I used to fear. Now it was peace. When I left that boardroom, I didn't look back. I didn't need to. That evening, I stood in my office looking out over the city I had once walked through alone, with holes in my coat and ambition in my bones. The lights flickered gently across buildings that now answered to me, not through fear, but through vision. The future wasn't inherited, it was built. And I hadn't just built something bigger than them, I had built something stronger than revenge. Something only possible because I had walked away when they told me to wait in the car.